Hey everybody, Mr. Klein here once again. I am talking about other important amendments today. We've talked about the Bill of Rights so far. We're talking about the first 10 amendments of our Constitution, which gives us our individual rights. The other amendments are just as important. We're going to pick through some of them and kind of see what it meant historically, contextualized. So we're talking about what was happening at that moment during that time. Why did that occur? We'll also see some amendments that were like, oh, we made a mistake, and see how that process works. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how do we make an amendment? So there's two different ways. Both have to be started by the legislative branch in the national government. The first one is that the amendment can be proposed by Congress itself. In order for that to happen, you have to have 2/3 vote in both houses. So 2/3 of the Senate and 2/3 of the House have to agree to propose this amendment to the rest of the country. And so that's a big part. So you have to have overwhelming support. So that's the first step, one way of doing it. The other way to propose an amendment is that you have a national convention. It's called on by Congress, which is the national government. And if 2/3 of the states, that means 34 states, believe that, hey, we need to have this amendment, they have a convention, they vote on it, and they decide to propose this amendment to everyone else. So 2/3 of the states' legislatures, so that means the state government's legislative branch, 2/3 of them agree that this needs to happen. So including that, plus 34 states doing that, always got to have a bill, plus 34 states doing that, you would have that proposed. Now, from there, there's a bunch of different things that can happen. So what we're going to do, we're going to go up to this step right here where we have Congress proposing it. And we're going to go through this arrow to step 2, which amendment is ratified. So once the House has proposed an amendment with 2/3 support in both houses, it goes to the state legislatures. From there, state legislatures have to vote to ratify this amendment. So remember, that means they have to agree for this change to happen. You have to have 38 states, so 3/4 of the states have to agree that this amendment should happen. So that's how you ratify it. So that's one way to ratify it. The other way is this one right here. Let's say that we have a convention like we had at the bottom. We go around this arrow, and then a convention can be held in each state. However, you have to have 3/4 of the states ratify this amendment. So the big thing to remember, to propose an amendment, no matter if it's by Congress or by convention, it has to be 2/3 majority vote. For the amendment to be ratified, it goes to the states, and you have to have 3/4 majority, or 38 states. So that's a key thing to remember here. So it can go either way. So you can have an amendment proposed by Congress, then it can go to a convention in the states, or you can have a convention that proposes the amendment, and it can go to the state legislatures of the states. Just depends on what happens there. So it has to be set in stone kind of what happens with that amendment. If it passes either by ratifying the state legislatures by 3/4 vote or by convention, that becomes an amendment. We have not had one in quite some time. There has been some, things said about what we should have as an amendment, we should be changing. It all just depends on that. But you got to have overwhelming support on both proposing the amendment and even more to ratify it or approve those amendments. So now let's go through some important amendments that we have in our Constitution. The first ones we're going to talk about are the Civil War era amendments. So the Civil War era, we talk about the North and the South, and the big reason why there's a fight was because of slavery. And so these amendments here kind of go through making sure that African Americans became citizens of the United States. So we have amendments 13, 14, and 15 here. 13th Amendment ends slavery. Okay, so it says slavery is forbidden in the United States. Okay, so that's the first amendment there. So end slavery. Slavery is illegal now in the United States. The 14th Amendment grants citizenship to anyone born in the United States. So what that did was that it allowed the people, the African Americans that were slaves, to have citizenship automatically and get those rights that we talked about in the first 10 amendments. Those are guaranteed now because of the 14th Amendment. Now this amendment, as we go further on in our future from this time period, starts playing a role where now anyone that's born on U.S. soil becomes a United States citizen. And so that's where you get a lot of people Now we talk about the immigration and things like that, where people that are undocumented come over to the United States, have a child, and they are legally a U.S. citizen. And so that's where we start seeing a lot of stuff you hear about in the news comes from this 14th Amendment, because anyone that is born in the United States is given citizenship. The 15th Amendment also comes from the Civil War era and granted all voting rights to men. That's key word there is men. Women still did not have the right to vote at this time. So before the 15th Amendment, you had to be white, male, and a landowner. That changed all that with the 15th Amendment. Now you had to be a man. Okay, and so a couple of things were dropped. If you're a woman during this time, you still do not have the right to vote. So the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment are all what we call Civil War era amendments. The 18th Amendment was the one that I was talking about earlier, where the United States said, we messed up. So the 18th Amendment came during the Prohibition era. A lot of people felt like alcohol was ruining the United States and was causing a lot more trouble. You had a lot of movements saying that alcohol is causing people bad things happening in their homes, and people just use that money not paying what they need to pay for. And so the United States bans alcohol from being sold. The problem with that is that starts what we talk about. You ever hear about moonshiners and things like that, running moonshine across different places? You start this what we call black market for alcohol. This also fuels the mobs and mafias. This is where they got a lot of their profits from, is because they were legally selling alcohol and moving it to different places. And so because they want to get rid of one bad thing, it starts creating a whole bunch of different things. You have a black market happening and people are still drinking. You also have these things called speakeasies that were like hidden bars that people would go to, and people were still doing what they needed to do. A little fun fact, because of the 18th Amendment, you have NASCAR, which a lot of people don't think about, because a lot of people that were moonshiners were soup up their cars. Once the 18th Amendment is gone, which we'll talk about here in a second, and they still race. They race each other, and that's how NASCAR was formed. So there were some things that came out of it that weren't as bad, but you still had the mobs and stuff like that, gangsters that were doing these things. Okay, we'll get back to 18th Amendment here in just a second. The 19th Amendment is just as important because it gives women the right to vote. And so that is a big one. We talk about suffrage. So not like suffering, like, oh, I'm suffering, but suffrage. So SUFFRAGE. So suffrage is the right to vote. So the 19th Amendment was because of the women's suffrage movement. And so that's where a lot of this came out of, and women had the same power as men to vote if they wanted to. And so that's where the 19th Amendment comes in 1920, and it says that that the citizens of the United States vote should not be denied or abridged, means shortened by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So if you are a woman, you can vote. If you're a man, you can vote. So now everyone is allowed to vote in the United States that is of legal age. So that was a big deal for that to go through. So the 19th Amendment is the women have the right to vote. So I said we're going to come back to the 18th Amendment is because of this one. So the thing with the Constitution is that if you make an amendment, that amendment is there forever. It does not leave the Constitution. So you have to figure out, what do I need to do? So a lot of people are like, we need to get rid of prohibition. We need to repeal this 18th Amendment. So they decide, in order to do that, you have to make another amendment that says that, oh, we messed up, we're repealing the 18th Amendment. So that's what the 21st Amendment does. The 18th Article of Amendment to the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed. So alcohol was now legal again in the United States. And so that's a way that if you want to get rid of something in the Constitution, you have to make an amendment for it. A lot of the things we talk about, we go back to Civil War era with slavery and things like that. When the 13th Amendment was created, now all the stuff about slavery in the Constitution was now gone. It's still in there, but it doesn't have any power anymore. So in order to change an amendment, you have to make another amendment. So that's a key thing to remember there. The 22nd Amendment, limits the office of the president to 2 terms. And so when we get into Washington and talking about precedents that he set, one of the precedents that Washington set was serving 2 terms. Everyone served at least 2 terms. Some served 1 because of voting and things like that. But no one served more than 2 terms in office until you get to this man I have pictured here, which is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR. FDR was elected 4 times. He died at his 4th term of office. That's when Harry Truman became president. But FDR was the first one. The reason why he served for so long is because there was a lot of turmoil going on. You had the Great Depression, you had World War II, and so a lot of people wanted consistency in their government. And so FDR was allowed to serve multiple terms, more than 2. Once FDR was gone, they decided to create the 22nd Amendment, which limits the office to 2 terms. Because once again, if you don't have that in the Constitution, then someone can serve forever, and you get back to having what we call, a monarchy or anything like that, where one person has so much power for so long. So the 22nd Amendment was created to limit the office to 2 terms. So from now on, from FDR on, you can only serve 2 terms or 8 years is all you could serve as president. The 25th Amendment, which we have here, which has been something that's been come to light a whole lot about what it is, what happens. The 25th Amendment deals with how the succession of power for the president exists. And so who has power if the president cannot carry out their duties? And so it's at whether that's disability or they're incapacitated or something like that. What's the line of succession here? So you can see on the right hand side, we have those things. So the president is number 1. If the president cannot fulfill their duties, it moves to the vice president, which makes sense. Okay. After the vice president, the next person is the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is 3rd in command. Speaker of the House is the leader of the House of Representatives. So that is a big deal because they represent the population more than the Senate. So that's why they are above the Senate there. For the Senate, you have President pro tempore, which means that they are the next in line, so they're 4th. Then after that, you start having the cabinet members have the succession. So you have Secretary of State, Treasury, Defense. You have the Attorney General as well, Secretary of Interior, Agriculture, and it goes on down through there to show you the line of succession for the president. What's really cool about the line of succession is that you have this person called the designated survivor during the State of the Union addresses, that they are secluded off somewhere, and if something ever happened, because you have everyone that in the chain of command there, if something was to happen, they have someone there that would become president and invoke that 25th Amendment. But you can see that's what it deals with. If the president cannot withhold their office, this is the line of succession that you have there. The 26th Amendment is the final one that we're going to talk about. This changes the voting age from 21 to 18. And so this came about during the Vietnam War. The reason why is because at 18, people can be drafted into the military. So a draft was that you put your name in and they randomly pull it out and said, hey, you're going to be drafted into the Army. Now, the draft still exists, but because we have more of a voluntary military now, the draft really isn't utilized at all. But at this time during the Vietnam War, it was. However, people that were 18 did not have the power to vote because you had to be 21. A lot of people felt upset about that. And you had a lot of people protesting, saying if we can send them to die for the country, they should be able to vote for their country as well. And so this had a lot of overwhelming support, and it lowers the voting age from 21 to 18. All right, so those are the other important amendments that we need to know. Just remember, each one of these have a context of why they were happening. That's the key thing there. So what was going on in the United States at that time for those amendments to be created. All right, let's always think about the contextual things of that. All right, I'll see y'all later.